Greetings, my friends. I'm Chris Jones, co host of this crazy thing we're calling a podcast with my good friend Becca Silver. And we are here to talk about something I'm guessing we've all experienced. And so I'll start it off with a question. Have you ever been in a place where you didn't feel like you had the credentials, the qualifications, the experience, the expertise to belong, otherwise known as imposter syndrome? If you felt it,
Yes.
you're not alone. Even though we don't have, I'm not going to produce any research that shows it. I've got my own thoughts and
Huh?
theories around imposter syndrome, and we're going to talk about it. So, Becca,
Mhm.
when we said we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, what was in your head?
The reality of it, I think, this will probably be a more vulnerable episode, and I do believe in model, not just modeling, but like embodying the things that I profess, right? So I say being authentic and vulnerable is important. And so I think talking about imposter syndrome as a consultant can feel vulnerable because people like you and me, we both consult. Um, we go into schools and we're expected to know everything, right? And or and it's like know the things you have been paid to like share the
We
things.
paid you a pretty good paycheck
Yeah,
for you to
yeah,
send us
like
some answers.
and you so and it's and so I want to talk because you and I are high level, high achieving consultants. We produce insane results in the schools that we work with, and and you and I both experience imposter syndrome, right? We're humans. And so, something that, I mean, I'm just reflecting on my own journey, my first year, because when I left being an instructional coach and I became a consultant, I was working for an ed tech company and or I was contracted. Let me just be very super clear. And I had imposter syndrome pretty much that entire year. I had this was 8 years ago. I had a high level of anxiety and there was just a lot of like I f- what's wild is I didn't feel I was like worried that people would find out I didn't have the skills when in fact I did have the skills. And I would surprise myself over and over again, be like, oh, I did it again.
I did
That
it.
was so great.
Yeah. I think so I want to try to not get in the existential conversation around imposter syndrome. Like none of us know what we're doing. We're all just trying to figure out life like
Yeah.
one moment. And like, I mean, it's truly true. Like if you think about it, like this is your first time around the sun, like, or not around the sun this year, but this is your first time like living your life. How do you know what the hell you're doing? Like, I don't
Yes,
know. I
exactly.
don't know what I'm doing. I just do the best that I can. I rely on my experience and my expertise and my training, and then we figure it out. And so I think what's interesting is my theory is that everyone has imposter syndrome, and how we respond to that in any given setting is either what we succumb to the imposter syndrome, and we cower and we don't take the risk or we don't do the thing, or we overcompensate with like bravado and this slam the fist on the table. I know what I'm doing. I know, like, and it just and it creates this space like, oh my gosh, I guess that person knows what they're doing. Like, no, that person is just responding to their imposter syndrome in a different way than you're responding to that imposter syndrome. And so I wonder, just to anyone who's out there listening, what would happen if you went into your next meeting or your next situation and just walked in and said everyone in this room has imposter syndrome? How they are experiencing and responding to that imposter syndrome is just their nature and who they are as humans. And so whether you're leading something or someone is leading you, it's like that when that old saying. I haven't heard too many people say this before. Like when you're public speaking, just imagine everyone in the audience is
In their
naked
underwear.
or
Yeah.
in their underwear.
Yeah.
I don't know if that actually ever worked for anyone, and I haven't heard many people say it um, for a very long time. But it's the same thing. Like imagine everyone's got imposter syndrome, And it's not that it's overcoming this idea of one of your mindsets, the mindset that I belong, the mindset that I'm worthy. You can coach yourself through those things, but until you're on the other side of the experience, you're going to be either consciously or unconsciously battling your imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
But
So what's
we all have it.
we do at different times in our life, right? It's not all, and it's just, it's not necessarily all the time everywhere, right? But it's sometimes we experience not belonging, not fitting in, not feeling good enough. So my version of that, that's so interesting. The thing that I actually say to myself when I'm in front of people, if I am, I mean, I love doing keynotes and I love being in front of folks. But early on in that part of my career, when I was in front of people, I would say to myself, everyone has a version of I'm not good enough. That's what I'd say to myself. And I'm like, every single person in here has some version of I'm not smart enough, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not whatever it is. Like it's just I'm not good enough. And we spend
Insecurity.
our lives, we don't realize it. Everyone listening, you have it too. And it's often in a blind spot, it's often hidden from our view. But what we do is, unfortunately, we spend, if it's hidden from our view, we spend our lives overcompensating for it. So often if someone is wildly um like very very smart, often they have some version of like I'm not smart enough, and they're
Right.
overcompensating, right? Someone that's like very hardworking, what is it, there's often someone that's like very hardworking is overcompensating for not being good enough in some way. And it's needing to prove, it's this wild engine of like I've got to prove that I'm good enough, and prove and prove and prove. And it's like it's so funny because like we're proving to this made up story in our head,
It's
right?
all in our heads.
It's just like in our head, or like there's no one out there saying you're not good enough. So looping back to imposter syndrome, I think if we can't name it, we can't tame it, right? And I think it's just like super helpful to be like, oh, I feel like a fraud right now. I'm in a room. I think everyone else is smarter than me. I'm afraid they're gonna find me out, right? And what are your thoughts around what people should do that moment they realize? Well, step one is notice. I like to say become a professional noticer. Like go through your life, but like notice, ooh, imposter syndrome is here. What are your recommendations for folks?
Yeah, I would say, and it's like obviously we're in here talking about from the coaching, the instructional coaching and school leadership like segments,
Mm.
like really thinking about how and when it shows up. Now, I do want to say this before I answer your question. I want to say like sometimes imposter syndrome is not a syndrome.
Huh?
Like sometimes you're not good.
Oh,
Some, sometimes sometimes it is
overly
not good.
confident syndrome.
Sometimes it is not good, and you can't you don't know until you're on the other side of the experience.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I can say. And so it's experience and experience, it's repetition, it's change, it's iteration, it's feedback, and not feedback in the complacent like, oh, you did a great job. Like, how do you think I did? Like, figure out who to ask, who's going to tell you the truth,
The truth,
because
yeah.
you will often like get feedback from people who just like, I I got stuff to do today. I don't have time to get into this. It was great. Keep it
Keep it
moving,
moving.
right? But if you've got your thought partners, if you've got your accountability partners, if you've got people out there you trust to say, all right, tell me what you think, and they're going to give it to you right between the eyes, like get those people and figure those things out, because that's how you overcome the imposter syndrome, is realizing that, okay, I am somebody, I am worthy, I have something to share, and it's good. This is how I can either make it better or just reassure myself that the next time I'm in this situation, don't think about it. But to your question, if 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 we're operating under the assumption that at any given time, at any given moment, in any given place in a person's life, they're going to experience imposter syndrome, and it hits you in a moment when you're getting ready to start your first principalship, or you're getting ready to coach a veteran teacher for the first time who gets
Mhm.
excellent test results, or you're getting ready to, move into a new situation where you're responsible for something. You're putting on some professional learning, or you're talking on a podcast for the first time. Recognize, I love the professional noticer thing. Like, recognize that it's there. And the only like piece of advice I would give is just be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're good, you're going to be good. If you're not, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
flop, and there's no sense in obsessing over whether you belong or whether you have that imposter. Like, whether it's there or not, it's going to be there. Just
Mm-hmm.
be yourself, do what you know, do what you do, be who you be.
Mm-hmm.
And if on the other side of that it sucked, then your imposter syndrome was real, and you keep it moving. Don't do it again.
Learn. Yeah.
Or figure out how to make it better. And if you're on the other side of it and you kicked butt and it was awesome and like it's repetition, like, okay, then I worried about it for nothing. But the only thing that I can say is don't worry about overcompensating for it. Recognize that, oh my God, I have this feeling, and just be yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Okay, so I want to acknowledge something within this thought process that you're sharing because this is, there's that moment we notice, oh, there's imposter syndromes right there. It can be very dysregulating. So having logical thoughts, like be yourself. If we are dysregulated, right? We flipped our lid, we are our prefrontal cortex, which is our logic, our problem solving, our critical thinking, goes offline. Our amygdala comes online, and it's like, we're in survival mode. We're afraid, right? It like helps us survive. The first, I would say the first thing if it's dysregulating, right? The first thing we need to do in that moment is quickly regulate ourselves, right? Because here we are in the meeting, it's happening. There is this fantastic clip that I show during my PDs, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But Chris, you haven't seen that. I don't think you've seen this. Have you heard of Benjamin Zander?
No.
He's a like an orchestra, he like coaches orchestra people, but he is a fantastic coach. And this is what he says. He goes, when we make mistakes, he's like very animated. He goes, when we make mistakes, we go, "Rrr." We're like, oh, I made a mistake, and our body goes down. And he goes, when you make a mistake, you gotta go down and go, how fascinating. And he throws up his hands like this. And when you watch it once, his voice will be in your head forever. And he goes, that's what you do. You go, how fascinating. And it's like every time you make a mistake, you go, how fascinating. Now, you can't do that in the middle of a meeting. Although I did have a principal. Oh my gosh. I had a principal recently say he said that in a meeting. And I was like, gosh, how did everyone react? They were talking about something very serious. He goes, how fascinating. I'm like, oh God. But I think being able to say to ourselves, how fascinating when we are, or some version that can get us regulated quickly can be super helpful to then be ourselves.
When do you feel your imposter syndrome triggered? I don't feel it in the moment. I feel it ahead of time. So I actually have some time to regulate myself before I'm like in it.
Oh, I off these days, I used to be like before, during, and after, like in my beginning consulting days. Now it will actually, in reflection, it will come up.
Yeah, I so it happens before and after for me as well. Like, I just recently
Hmm.
just modeled something that I don't know went well, and so I obsessed over it the rest of the night until the next
Hmm.
day I went to another place and did some really great things that were really good. So it kind of boosted, like, okay,
Hmm.
it was probably fine. Everything was good to go. It's just you probably didn't have the effect that you intended to have, and you recognize it, and so now you're doubting, your competence and your ability to move something forward. So that's interesting. But like, this idea of, for me, I've never had to regulate in the moment, because I don't know if I've
Mm.
ever felt the imposter syndrome. Like, once I'm in it, I'm hyper focused. I'm ready to go. Because you were talking about, I forget what it was, but you made me think of Brene Brown, when
Hmm.
she talked about, in our like moments of trauma or moments of stress,
Hmm.
of high stress, we either become hyper over functioners
Yeah.
or we shut down
Under.
and
Yeah.
become under functioners. So
Hmm.
you made me think about like if you in that moment you're in it and you feel it, like whether that's imposter syndrome or something else, you either go into hyper mode to like overcompensate and go, or you completely shut down and you go
Yes.
under functioning mode. But then you made me think like, when do I experience imposter syndrome? And I don't know if I've experienced it in a moment where I didn't have time to regulate and kind of tell myself, just be you, dude. Just if it flops, it flops. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're not gonna
Yeah.
die.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've seen coaches get like taken over in like meetings with maybe admin, maybe their bosses. And that actually brings me into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was the impact when imposter syndrome goes unnoticed. I was gonna say undiagnosed, but it's not a diagnosis. When it becomes when it's there and we don't notice it, it impacts our behavior.
Yeah.
And I love what you just said, what Brene Brown says. We either become over functioners or under functioning, right? And I see both, like especially in leadership team meetings where I'll have a coach running around doing 20 things, like trying to like really prove like I do know this. Or and then I've more often than not I see coaches clam up, say
Yeah.
everything's fine and don't share anything. And both are harmful and detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it shows up for leaders who in high stress who overfunction, it looks a lot like micromanagement.
Mm.
So even if
Mm.
somebody is not typically a micromanager, you can tell if they're a hyper functioner in a stressful moment by the level in which they either delegate or they micromanage.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. Um, it's interesting. Yeah. Whenever I see behaviors like that, like behaviors of like needing to be in control in some way, like over controlling, like micromanaging, or extreme behaviors, right? Or over functioning or under functioning, I just simply ask myself, what is this behavior telling me about them? And possibly what it could be motivating this behavior. I don't know. None of us know, but I do start to inquire to myself if someone else is behaving in a way that's like maybe not their authentic self. And then certainly for myself, when I notice I'm over, sometimes I have to see my own behavior and be like, whoa, why did that happen? Right. To then be able to be like, oh, you're experiencing imposter syndrome. Um, so yeah, even just like using behavior as a litmus test almost. Like,
Yeah.
huh, why did that
For
happen?
me, like moments of chaos, I become extremely calm. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
when the you know what is hitting the fan,
Mm-hmm.
I won't say that I retreat or I underfunction. I just become very calm to try to get the full picture before
Oh.
knowing which way to go or what to tackle first because the chaos is so. I've noticed that about my own, and I didn't notice it until I was a principal. I'm sure it came in my army training in moments of chaos, being very calm, the idea of slow is smooth and smooth is fast, like all of those things. Like I feel myself just become very calm, very like observant, calculated, like very hyper aware. But when it comes time to a stressful situation that is like needs immediate action, like needs fixing, I will I will micromanage a little bit. I'll say we need to do this. Here we go. This is what we're gonna do. Boom, 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 and I'm gonna make sure all of it gets done. Like no delegation, like no help, but it's just that stressful or that high of a need for it to trigger in me. It's bad. And so if I were to not overfunction, then I think, and of course I think this because it's how I respond. I think it would be bad leadership. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're just gonna let that go? Like no, we're gonna do this.
Mm.
Oh, because some people sometimes need to see like boom action, decisiveness. But those are reserved for the highest of stressful moments because I don't like to make decisions in isolation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, you're really good at that. Um, I was just
Yeah,
thinking about
I,
something.
I think I'm tapped out on imposter syndrome though.
I had one final thought about it. Just around uh, when like the impact of operating underneath on top of it and not noticing it and addressing it. Oh, okay. This is the final thought about imposter syndrome. Here's the deal. When we're operating under imposter syndrome is just a story that we tell ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And it could be something like I don't belong here. It could be they're going to find out I'm actually unskilled at this, right? There's some version of I feel like a fraud, right? This is the thing that happens to us when we are operating under a story. Our brain filters information to make that story true. It causes us too much cognitive dissonance to also let in things that are untrue. So we just can't, right? So if I'm
Confirmation bias.
confirmation bias, exactly. So what happens when we have a story like I don't belong here, or they think I'm stupid, or whatever it is, or I we actually find proof for that. We either admit actual information in that gives us proof, or we twist information
Mhm.
and it's almost like we let in false information to prove that it's true.
Yeah.
So when imposter syndrome goes unnoticed, we're inadvertently finding proof that it's true. So even more reason to notice it is make up a new story when you're like, oh, I'm saying to myself that I don't belong here because they think I'm unskilled. I could actually say I'm always a work in progress, and I'm showing up with a ton of skills, and this is the best I can do right now, right? So there's lots of things we could say. So anyway, I wanted to kind of like end on that as a call to action. Notice, notice, notice. When we have imposter syndrome. Any final words from you?
No, I got a question.
Yeah.
Like transparency, authenticity, vulnerability. We agree that those are high quality traits in our leaders we want,
Yes.
right? We agree to that?
Yes, we agree.
So a leader saying the words imposter syndrome out loud to her or his people. What do you think about that? If you like saying lightly, like, man, I'm experiencing some imposter syndrome right now. Have you ever experienced it? It's just like getting it out there, saying it as almost like a nervous twitch, just saying
Yeah.
the words out loud, like and like having that moment of vulnerability, like I don't know, guys. I'm feeling kind of imposter syndrome right now, but I'm gonna do my best. Here we go. I like. What do you think about that?
Ooh, I don't know. I have some raw thoughts that have not been processed at all. So I'll share the way you just kind of said that last piece, I think could be helpful. I think there's ways to say it though that could feel burdensome on the group, like the group would not know what to do with it.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know what to
oh,
do with that. Like, do I clap for you?
sorry that
Like, do I
you
give you some encouragement? Like,
yeah, right, right. So I think there's really powerful ways for us to be responsible for our stories and what owning what we're saying to ourselves in a way that doesn't feel burdensome to the people we're saying that to,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I'm just trying to think like I don't know how I would say it to be transparent, vulnerable and to own, oh, I'm having this experience. But maybe even saying it like that, like, oh man, I'm just like, I'm having this experience. Like, I'm worried
Yeah,
that I'm not going to be able to come up with a
yeah,
solution to this problem. And you know what? What I know about this team is that we work well
yeah.
together and that we are all works in progress, and that we're gonna figure this out together. Right? Something around,
Oh wow, I just got nervous. This is an intimidating group. Like, say it in a way that's like
yeah, there we
half
go.
sarcastic but half authentic. Where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, like, do I laugh and chuckle or like, how do I like? I don't need you to
Ooh.
unpack it. I just need to say
Yeah.
things. I just need to say the thing out loud.
Yeah. Oh, I like the lightheartedness. Ooh, I love
Yeah,
the lightheartedness because then it doesn't feel burdensome at all. It's like really, yeah, I think finding ways to be, I think lighthearted is this awesome way of talking about this
I've
stuff.
said this in a coaching situation. I've said I don't know the answer. I don't have the answer, but let's roll up our sleeves and examine this together. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's the fact that you don't have the answer and it's okay, but sometimes it's saying like I don't know either, dude. But
Yeah.
here's the data. Here are the data, and here's the question. Like, let's work through it.
And I think that's an antidote to imposter syndrome, being willing to say I don't know, because imposter syndrome inherently makes us afraid to say I don't know.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
And I think maybe one of the antidotes is to
Just saying it.
say
Just
I
saying it.
don't know, right? And to get like, look, our brain is saying it will be detrimental, it will harm you if they know that you don't know. And then to find some, this is really growth mindset, some growth mindset phrases that we can own. And here's the thing, ooh, be prepared, be prepared. Like we can pre-prepare statements that we can say. So when it comes time, like, oh, there it is, I'm afraid, I am ready to say the thing,
Yeah.
uh, about not knowing. So I don't even have to think it up. Ooh,
And if that authenticity and that transparency and that vulnerability becomes a pattern, that's who you are observed and looked at and
yeah,
expected as a leader. So it
yeah,
changes the dynamic, it changes the culture, it changes the relationship within the organization to
yeah.
be one that allows for that to happen. But if you're clammed up all the time and then all of a sudden you have that moment of vulnerability, that it could create an awkward situation.
Yep. It's saying, I don't know. Let me find out. And that does not impact our credibility.
No.
People super appreciate it. You know what it does impact? Connection.
Yeah.
It grows
Like, oh my
connection.
God, you're a human being just like me. Yeah. Imagine that. I got to go
Yeah.
to the bathroom too.
All of us do. There's books on it. Awesome. Okay, this is such an interesting conversation. It definitely took some twists and turns I did not expect, and I think that was awesome. Okay, cool. Well, this was a great conversation, and until next time, Chris Jones. Until next time.
Bye.